but I'm sure it'll be really helpful. So I'm Dom. I grew up sort of figuratively and literally in the army. So I was from a military family and joined the army straight out of university. I specialized in reconnaissance, but I was an infantry officer. So most of what you do is leading and operating. So creating processes that work even under very strenuous conditions. That experience has been very helpful in startups and building processes that people can follow as they scale, which is great. I was in the military for 7 years, and on leaving, I joined a startup called New Role. I led their venture capital arm for 4 years, roughly, while we were growing from 10 people to 70 people. New Role essentially is a board hiring organization. So we would hire board members for SMEs and big listed businesses as well. But mainly what I was doing was selling. So learning a lot of sales skills and how to build a startup. I recently started a company called Talent Torch, and that's where I met Hugo, and he can sort of go into that, but they've invested in us. And we essentially use headhunting tactics, the same tactics that you would use to find C-level and board level individuals, to find outsourced personnel from places like the Philippines to place into startups and growing businesses in the UK. The idea being that you can save a lot of money, 80% of your costs, without sacrificing the quality of them. So that's me. I'll hand it over to Hugo.
Amazing. Hey, everyone. Thanks so much for having us. So I went straight out of university into the wonderful world of startups. I founded a business called Charged Up, which is phone charging in pubs, bars, shopping centers, etc. We scaled that business. We raised a bit of money from people like Jam Jar and a few family offices, like the guys at Jägermeister, as well as the Garage Soho. And then got hit with a bit of an issue when old COVID came around. Revenue dropped to zero, had to very quickly either pivot or die. And I'd love to kind of chat about some of that stuff today. We decided that we would pivot. We created a sanitizer company, and that ended up doing about £7 million of revenue in about 7 months. And then we went on to sell that business. We then also in COVID decided we hadn't had enough of pivoting and decided to also build a payments company, which I sold last year. Now we have built a new business called Founders Capital, which is both a community and an investment fund. We've invested about £5 million into about 20 different businesses over the last 12 months since founding it. Having a great time learning how to be an angel investor while also, getting stuck into lots of new ventures and helping the next kind of cohort of founders come through and build epic businesses, such as our investment into Dom's business. Always trying to find things where we had the problem ourselves, and then kind of scratching our own itch. That's what we saw with Dom's business. So that's why we invested. Really keen to chat about how to deal with a crisis, pivot, how to, cut costs in these tough times when raises take longer than you expect. And generally just share as much learnings as we've had over the last few years with the group here today.
Yeah. When you pivoted from Charged Up to the sanitizer business, did you have investors in Charged Up before that you had to tell about that pivot?
Yes. So it was a bit weird. So when we first started it, it was very much just like a publicity kind of, let's do something nice and like, let's help out. And, we made 100 units and then suddenly they all sold. And then at that point, the investors they were like, well, actually, this is maybe a real opportunity. Why don't you just lean into it a little bit more? And I think they'd kind of written off the charging business at that point as well. So although we had to bring the investors along on the journey, it wasn't actually that difficult because it was such unprecedented times that, they were kind of happy that we were doing something rather than just floundering and dying. So yeah, it would be very odd to flip from a tech company to an ethanol and materials production company now, but in COVID that was kind of like anything's fair game. And a number of the investors ended up using us as kind of like a sounding board for other founders trying to figure out what they were going to pivot to, because we moved very quickly, very decisively, and yeah, it was a wild time.
I think one of the things that founders struggle with when they're pivoting, and this might even be from like a similar business to another similar business, but with a different revenue model or something, it's how to then tell the story of what they were doing before and tie it into that overall kind of narrative for when they're raising investment for the new thing. Did you have to do that at all? Like, did you bring new investors along on the journey when you'd already like changed from phone charging to hand sanitizer? And how did you kind of build that in to get, I guess, trust in you as a team?
Yeah, I think you can always somewhat reverse engineer the story into what you want it to be. In our case, the sanitizer thing, we wanted to try and help out the industry and get them back open, so that they would look upon us more favorably when they reopened the pubs and wanted to get phone chargers again. But what we did was retrospectively use that story as this was actually just a big growth hack all along. We sold sanitizer purely to get more customers in the door so that we could sell them the product later, and that actually did resonate with the investors. Whether or not they believed that it was true, it kind of doesn't matter. It did exactly what we said it was set out to do. So yeah, I think investors like a clean story. One piece of advice I would give is, if you are going to pivot very severely like we did, set it up in a new company. So when we did the sanitizer thing, it was in the same company as Charged Up, the same limited entity, so that when we went to sell it, the money went into the company rather than going into my pocket and other investors' pockets, which is obviously not as useful, especially when you want to try and sell something off or perhaps shut it down. In the other cases, let's say it had gone completely wrong and you wanted to actually just walk away from it. Having it in its own limited company would have been much easier to just wind that specific thing down, and any bills that needed to be paid, and that would have then all been contained within that one company rather than being split across new co and old co, if that makes sense. It's easy in the UK to create a new company. It takes like £12 and 10 minutes on Companies House. So like, I would just recommend doing that. And I actually got the inverse advice from my board at the time. They said, sort that out later. And it was actually the wrong advice. So, just because you've got good people on the board doesn't necessarily mean that they know what they're talking about.
We've heard conflicting advice about that as well. Some people saying just wait for an investor. And if an investor says, I will only invest if the two companies are combined, or if it's a separate entity, then do it at that point. But you might not get any investors that say that. And like you say, looking back, it might be obvious, but you don't know what to do looking forward, whether it's like the admin or the hassle of having two businesses that you're operating at the same time. There are so many questions, and I know we've got so much to get through. So if anybody else has any questions on the pivoting side of things, post it in the chat, or we can ask afterwards. I just want to move on quickly to your exits, because we were just talking in the previous session about whether you should put your exit strategy on your pitch deck, or whether you should even have an exit strategy in mind when you are initially building your business, or whether that makes you look too like short-termist, that you just want a kind of a quick escape. And I know that there's a few different schools of thoughts with investors on this topic as well. Like, investors want you to be bought in for the long term, and it might take longer than you expect. So they don't want you to like quit after 2 years. And so actually, if you've got this quick exit in mind, does it make it look like you're not committed enough? What's your thoughts on that, having had a couple of exits and as an investor?
Yeah, I think that slide, if you do choose to include it, it's more about like signaling where you want to take the business and how big you think the thing can get. It's not about, oh yeah, I'm going to sell this thing in 3 years, and if I don't, I'm going to give up. Like that, obviously, if you said that, then that's clearly not the right way to frame it. But it's more, in my eyes, I see it more as, are they going after, you know, an IPO? Are they going after like $1 billion opportunity here? And do they see the business as that kind of business? Or are they thinking like, oh, let's build this up and sell it for 30 million, and we're not going to take too much investment on board? Both of which are completely valid things. You know, like you could probably make similar amounts of money, and depending on which investors you got on board and what kind of a pref stack you ended up with. So, you know, don't think of it like one is better than the other. But if you do choose to include that, I think you just need to make sure that you are aligning it to what you want and the type of investors that you're pitching. Like in Silicon Valley, you know, if you're going after the top tier VCs, you cannot be putting that you're going to sell the thing for 50 million quid in 5 years' time, because they just don't care about that. That's not at all in their model. You know, they want companies that are only swinging for the fences, only going after $1 billion exits and above, and that's the only way that their fund model works. If you're going after an SEIS or EIS fund in the UK, they're very happy with a 10x return. So if you can show them that you've got a really good business that's doing XYZ, and we just need to do it, you know, 3 or 5 or 10 times bigger, and then suddenly we can sell it and everyone walks away with, you know, a 50 million quid exit, that's happy days. That's like a, you know, a really good result for an EIS fund. So I think you just need to focus on who you're pitching to, and then figure out how you're framing that exit slide. And yeah, personally, I don't think it's a bad thing at all to include that. I think it's good to show, you know, this is what we're trying to do here, set it out from the start, and then everyone's incentives are aligned. And you've kind of, you've almost, like people would say, you try and fall out at the start rather than at the end. You know, you've had the discussion up front, and everyone is then aligned going into it. So yeah, I would say put it in there and then choose which way you're going.
Yeah, I'm going to try and deal with Julian's comment in the chat. He's confused about angel investors' attitudes to exit, kind of similar to what I just said, but maybe from your perspective, and I get that all angel investors might be different in terms of what they want when they're investing in startups, but is your dream scenario that you invest at the pre-seed, you keep your stake basically through the whole investment life cycle if they raise seed, series A, B, C, beyond? Would you want to then add more capital to maintain the same stake in the business? Would you want to cash out at any point earlier? Would you be holding out for an exit or an IPO? Like, what's your kind of dream situation when you're coming in at the early stages?
It's a really good question. I'd say the ideal is that you get in as early as possible at the lowest valuation, hang on to as much of it as possible, and then maybe at Series B or C, you take the original capital that you invested off the table, so that you are now in it for nothing, and then the rest can just roll up to the IPO. Like, that's the absolute dream. It's very difficult to achieve that though. I'd also say, like, obviously, if you're going to do follow-on investments, the business needs to be really overperforming versus the rest of the portfolio. Like, you know, we've doubled down on a couple of businesses, but you know, if the business has not shown significant progress since the last round, it's quite difficult to, you know, be the lead investor or even, you know, add on additional investment if it's a bit of a bridge round or what have you, because ultimately you know, we're not a fund, we are a syndicate, and the way we operate is we need to sell to our members, and if the members aren't excited about it, it's difficult to put more cash in. So yeah, it's different for different types of investors. If it's an angel, you know, any bet, you can do whatever you want with them. It's really just about how do they feel that day, and, you know, do they like you or whatever. If it's a fund, you know, they might have strict rules about how much follow-on capacity they have, and all of that kind of stuff. And if it's a syndicate, it's, it really depends on whether the members are engaged in the business, if you've kept them up to date, if you, shown progress, and are you then worthy of getting more cash from that group of people.
Yeah.
It's a bit more loose for us, unfortunately.
Yeah. I'm just going to take another question from the chat because it relates to something that you said earlier. So if there's founders in a situation where they might be going through a pivot where the two companies are so different that they decide to set up a different business, how does that appear to an investor? Does it look like someone's trying to spread themselves too thin by running two businesses at the same time? And therefore, would it be better to focus on one when you're pitching, or if you wound the other one up because it wasn't performing so well, does that kind of like feed into an investor's opinion on how successful you're going to be, or what's the best approach?
I think when you're pitching to people, you have to be all in. I think it's actually unfair to the investor to have like a side hustle that's kind of, it's like, if you're not all in on this thing, why am I going to put money into it? Like that's the brutal truth. So I think you should you just want to keep the story as simple as possible. People want an easy yes. They don't want red flags or amber flags when they're going through the process. So the more kind of things that you put in the way of that, the less likely you are to make it all the way through to the cash in the bank. So ideal scenario is you have one thing, you only talk about that thing, the person invests in that thing. If you are moving from idea 1 to idea 2, and you think idea 2 is the key to success, then the story can be, we did idea 1, that's now being sold or wound down or whatever you want to say about that. We're 100% focused on idea 2. And if you need to move the new investors across, there are methods where you can give people, shares for pennies, a penny each or whatever, if you want to give them some credit in the new thing. But yeah, I think you just need to make sure it's as simple as possible for people to read and understand. And, people get hit with so many different pictures. If there's any flags, amber or red, then they'll often just move on, I think.
There's another comment in the chat from Doug, who's asking how much you focus on what's happened before compared to what's going to happen in the future. So if you've had a pivot, how much do you talk about the pivot and the learnings from the pivot, which might be a really important part of your journey because it's got you to where you are today, versus how much you talk about the future opportunity and where you're going next based on that learning? I guess the balance of talking historically versus opportunity.
It depends if the pivot or the thing that happened pre-pivot shows that there is some validation of the market. Like, I would just like, the key to a pitch is just showing that people want the thing that you're building, and they're willing to pay for it. So like, I would just not get too distracted with like your life story or your company's story. It's like, if you were doing a thing and then it showed significantly that this was the move to go on to, then maybe that's worth including in the kind of the 3 or 4 minute pitch that you give to people. But if it's kind of just to tell them how you got to this point and it's not showing that there's loads of demand, then I wouldn't bother. I'd just keep it super.
Sorry, I just froze for like 1 second there. But I think we're back. Cool. I know there's a bunch of questions coming in on the chat and we have so much to get through. So if you do have any more questions about pivots or exits or that kind of thing, Harry, I'll try and get to your question later as well. We can go back to it, but I want to get through to some of the cost saving techniques that the two of you have come up with, and then talk a little bit more about hiring, especially international hiring, and how that can tie in with some of the cost saving. So just to set the scene, Hugo, I saw on LinkedIn that you posted about it yesterday, that you asked 250 founders in your community, and then you kind of crowdsourced different ideas for saving money from them. Can you just explain a bit more about what you did, and then any kind of key cost savings between you and Dom that are particularly noteworthy?
Yeah, absolutely. I think, I run a thing called Founders Capital. Obviously, we've got a community of hundreds of founders who've now become investors as well. And what I sometimes do is I'll ask the community, a specific question. Like we're trying to create a report on, what are people paying themselves at different stages of business, whatever, and then share it out. What we did about 2 weeks ago was ask the question of what are people doing, or what have they done in the last kind of 6 months or so to reduce burn in their business, or make the business more efficient if they're already profitable. I've obviously gone through various different iterations of different businesses, and the most, I think, useful example is on the phone charging business. So as I said, that nearly died in COVID. We then post-COVID installed a managing director to run that business. It now runs with a blend of contractors, offshore workers hired through Dom's business, and also we've just used a lot of different tools to kind of keep the costs as low as possible in that business and make it as profitable as possible. And yeah, I really, I think it was very useful in our little founder community to get all of this info. And I thought, why not share it with the wider world? And because there's a lot of founders going through challenging times at the moment, trying to figure out how to cut costs when investors are not getting back, or whatever is going on. And I think this is the period where if you double down and make your business as efficient as possible, you're really going to stand out, and also you're going to be the one cockroach that survives and gets through, and therefore you'll be the one that gets the money on the other side when the investors do come back. So yeah, I think maybe Dom, do you want to take us through some of the list, because I feel like I've been monologuing quite a lot.
No. Well, I think the investor stuff is and pivoting. The pivot king needs to give some insight. So I think that's very valuable. I think you're right. And one of the things that stood out to me is that a lot of the founders who gave their insights, we were working on this together, were looking retrospectively. So they'd already built their businesses, and they retrospectively often had to cut costs. So they'd built something great, but they built it with add-ons that weren't necessary. So they're almost sort of saying, if I was starting again, if I was raising now, this is what I would do. And it starts with the mindset, and it's a kind of mindset of austerity. So if you always are thinking that I don't have enough money, and actually bootstrapping helps with this, because you're always sort of under tension. So every time you're about to buy a piece of software, you're thinking, actually, do I need this piece of software? And by the way, a really good resource on this is a book called Profit First, which sort of tries to flip things around. So rather than thinking about your profit being whatever you have left, you think, okay, I have profit now. Everything else, the sort of $70 a month contract for this piece of software, that's actually coming out of my profit, which is really, really helpful. And then maybe a tactical example of this, rather than sort of talking about whole books. Software often has great marketing. So a really good example would be ATS systems. So if you're either a recruiting business or you're starting to recruit people, you don't really need Workable or an applicant tracking system. All of those things can be built on pieces of software like Airtable combined with Zapier. And that'll cost you sort of $10 to $20 a month, rather than the huge amount that it can cost you to be purchasing this other software. Same goes for CRM systems and various other things that people will try to sell you. So yeah, I think I'd start with the mindset. Act broke. That was kind of their top thing, or the common theme that went through it. And as a result, you won't get into that situation later on. But look, we can go into the ways of cutting costs when you are in that situation as well. But I think that'll be my first one.
I was just going to say, we had, I think I mentioned this to you two before, but we had Stephen, the founder of Fueled, on Tuesday, who had received a term sheet for £1 million investment, but the term sheet was just so awful that he didn't accept it, and he decided to bootstrap the business instead. And so he was talking about mindset, he was saying if I get a client in and that client is worth 10 grand a year, what does that 10 grand pay for? Like, what could it unlock in terms of spending that I want to make? So rather than spending anything up front, it forced you to think more about sales and building a profitable business so that you could backtrack that profit and spend it on growth.
Yeah, 100%. And I think that often people will they'll sort of spend a lot of money regardless of what it's getting them. And when you have VC funding, sometimes you can get on this sort of hedonic treadmill where you get VC funding, but then you spend all of your time chasing more VC funding rather than actually building a profitable and predictable revenue machine. And I know this is another question, but the best way of saving money is to kind of make more money. and I think a lot of people get the founder-led sales part wrong. This is something that I was doing over the last sort of 6 years, and Hugo will know a huge amount about it as well. But it needs to be you first doing the selling. You need to have something that's already working for you, and then you can delegate it. Then you can sort of hire more people to do it. But they won't be able to do it if you can't do it, basically.
Epic. I've just shared the link to the post on the chat here if anyone wants to get that resource. We'll happily share it with you.
We'll be bringing out a sort of a blog post on this, which splits it down into sort of more tactical actions, because sometimes someone could say, do this, save on office space, and it's quite difficult to actually do those things. But yeah, we'll go into those things. There are three main areas, and I think it was mindset, like I mentioned earlier. Talent is a really big one. Most of your overheads walk around on 2 legs. Office space and where that talent lives is another one, and then the other one is software haggling, which we've gone into. But they're future questions, I think.
Yeah. Speaking of costs, kind of. I'm trying to like articulately get us back to Harry's question based on what you just said. I think at the moment with like no code tools, and you can build something using a piece of software that doesn't cost that much money, the barrier to entry for what you need to achieve, it's a lower barrier to entry, which means you can achieve more with less. But then the flip side of that is investors are expecting you to have achieved more, because if you can build a no code prototype, then you should be able to have built it and proven that you've got users or a bit of early traction. And so Harry's question was that he's heard that pre-seed now is more like seed. You're expected to have way more in terms of early signs of product market fit, or users on the platform, or MRR, or traction, or this kind of thing. Do you think that that's true? And what can founders do to prove that they're building something that their users are going to love if they haven't got the ability to actually like build a product or a prototype and have it tested?
I would say that is probably quite true. That's exactly how it was when I guess, sorry, let me go back. I think it depends on what type of founder you are. Have you done this thing, a couple of times before, shown that you can build, shown that you can sell, shown that you can exit a business? If yes, then you don't need to build stuff before you go out and pitch. You can go with a pitch deck and you can just tell people about your big, broad vision, and then they'll give you cash. If you haven't shown it before, which is exactly how it was when I was building the phone charging business. I was straight out of uni, hadn't really ever had a proper job, let alone built a company before, and so the bar for getting money off investors was super high. We literally had a working product with an app, and we'd already got people to pay using a manual version, like an MVP version of our product, which was literally buying a bunch of batteries on Alibaba and then going to a festival with an iZettle card machine and renting them out to people. We'd done all of that, and it was only at that point when we literally had a working model that we'd produced in China and an app that connected to it. There was a bit of pretending that went on in that first meeting, but it looked like it worked. All of that had to be done before we were able to raise the first actual equity investment, which was 200K into the business. And we'd managed to do all of that just through grants and prize funds and stuff. We got the first money from Exeter Uni, 5 grand, then 10 grand from Shell, I think it was. And I think we got another 10 grand from O2. Like, there's so many grants and, things out there to support founders. Just try and be as scrappy as possible. That's what I'd say, is like, get as much equity-free money in as possible, prove as much as possible, doing ridiculous stuff like standing in the rain, handing out batteries. And, then the story was, we went to this festival, we rented the batteries, we made 2 grand in 3 days. Like, that shows that people are willing to pay for this product. And then when you build the real tech version of it, we expect to have an even better uptake, and the unit economics will make sense. Like, that was the story that we told to people, and it resonated. And I think people like a bit of scrappiness. There's all of these great stories you hear of, even the biggest businesses in the world, like Airbnb. They were selling Obama O's, I think, like a cereal, to fund the first build of their product, because they were so strapped for cash. Like, they did ridiculous stuff. And I think, especially angels, who generally are people who've built businesses before, and they will resonate with that like early story, and actually you'll be much more able to get money off them if you've proven stuff like that, without going out for cash. So yeah, I would just say, try and figure out what your batteries in a field and an iZettle machine is for your business. Try and find the simplest, quickest way of proving, even if it's just a small part of the product, and like, maybe it's super concierge, maybe it's actually you sat there, on the back end doing it, or if it's done over email or over WhatsApp, or even if it just feels like it's a real product. I think that's so much better than just needlessly, banging your head against the wall, trying to get people to give you money so that you can then build the thing. I would focus on just trying to prove that there's someone who will buy it.
Do you think it's partly proving that someone that will buy it, and partly proving your own like mindset as a founder? Because investors often say that they're investing in the founder or the founding team at the beginning, and the fact that you're prepared to go out and stand in the rain and sell something proves how much you're willing to try. And someone who's like, well, I can't possibly do anything until I've raised external funding, does that then tie into what you think their mindset is like if you're investing in them?
Yeah, I really think that's it is such a great thing if you can see that someone has like hustled. Like, this guy came and pitched me the other week. He's built a business not dissimilar from Charged Up, but for anaphylactic kits in schools. And he's done the whole thing basically bootstrapped, got it into thousands of schools. And it's only at this point that he's actually raising money. And it's like, that is such an easy proposition to say yes to, because he's like hustled and done a load of sales and like all of this kind of stuff. Versus, I got another pitch deck just before this, and they're like, they're all in other jobs. They're thinking about this fun idea. And it's like, we need to raise money before we quit our jobs and do this thing. It's like, as much as I think it's a cool idea, it's very difficult for me to put money on idea 2 versus idea 1, because idea 1 has already got traction, and the founders have shown that they'll run around the place selling their product to people. So yeah, I think it's a real kind of, and I know everyone's got different circumstances and all this kind of stuff, but like, it's a real turn off if people haven't just jumped in and figured stuff out before they're actually starting to raise money. Because it shows that they needed a stable income, and if shit hits the fan down the line, are they going to do the exact same with the business that you've just invested in and go back and get a job at Amazon or whatever? You want to see people who are going to stick with it for a long time.
Yeah, I guess it's that proving you can do a lot with a little, rather than taking loads of VC funding and proving that you can do a little with a lot. If you can do a lot with very little, imagine what you could do if you get that 250K, 500K, whatever it is that you're raising.
That's the story. Yeah.
I'm going to move on again to, well, actually, quick question based on what you just said. If you have this figure in the top of your head, you mentioned you asked the founder community how much salary they paid themselves. Do you know what the average number was? Just if any founders here are interested to know what to put on their financials for their own salary.
Yeah, we've got a thing that lists out for each different stage. I think if you're pre-raise, you really don't want to be taking money out of the business. if you've raised a seed round, I'd say, probably 30 to 50 is fair. Once you've raised £1 million, I think you can start to pay yourself a bit better, maybe get up to like 70 to 100. And then, if you've raised Series A, maybe like 120 is probably fair. But like any investor, like obviously don't be ridiculous. Like I have seen some ones where people are paying, like founders are at Series A stage and they're paying themselves £500,000 a year. And that's a bit of a turn off. But if you are just doing something that feels fair, it's like appropriate for your situation. Obviously, if you're, just straight out of uni or whatever, you don't need as much money. If you've got kids, whatever, you maybe need a bit more. As long as it feels appropriate to your stage and the amount of money, it's only a very like manipulative, odd investor that's going to like make that a red line. I think like the key is that the investor is trusting you as a founder to make the right decision for the business. So if they're starting to dictate what you pay yourself, then I think that's a bit of a red flag. Yeah. The other way around, as in towards the investor. I've personally only had that with one group of investors who were the most scary people I've ever pitched to. I won't say who they are, but they were like a bunch of bankers, basically, very, very senior at a big failed bank. And a couple of them were billionaires, and they just grilled me nonstop and then started asking about my salary at the end of it. And I think I was paying myself like maybe like 40 grand or so. It wasn't anything like to write home about. And I ended up walking away from their deal and taking someone else's. And I think I'm pretty glad I did that, because I think they would have been a nightmare. But yeah, the key is to have lots of choices so you can walk away from people ideally.
Any other, I could just keep asking you questions forever, but I know that some people ideally want to get some feedback from you for their pitch if you're up for it. Any other red flags? Like red flags the other way, like you say, when you're pitching investors that people should be looking out for?
This all of this stuff, it's like if you can't get the money in, like it doesn't really matter. So like obviously if you've only got one option and this is the business is going to die, take the money and you can figure out all of the other stuff later. I'd say if they're putting like, if you do have choice, you would prefer the cleanest term sheet possible, with no board seats, and just keep everything as simple as possible, and then basically just work back from there. So like any additional stuff on top of that, if they say, oh, we need to take a board seat and an observer seat, and we need to charge you XYZ every year to be on the board, maybe that starts to be something that you can push back on. It's very difficult to give like a broad statement on this one, I think. But really, it's just like try and get as many options on the table as possible, and then you can negotiate the points that you think are relevant. Like, big one for me that I always stuck to and was able to get through, raise like 10 million quid and not ever have to put it in, was allowing people to have a pref stack on their shares. So we kept it that every single share was an ordinary share all the way through, which basically just, I don't know if everyone knows what this means, but some people, I saw competitors who raised far more than us, and they had a 3x liquidation preference on the investors' shares. That means that I think they invested it was 90 million into the business with a 3x preference stack. That means that they'd have to get 3 times 90 back out of the business when it goes, if it was sold, before anyone else got anything. That means that you're just making it so difficult for yourself, and setting it such that you have to really succeed, otherwise you walk away with nothing. Like, I actually think it's quite unfair on founders, but VCs do it, so you just have to deal with it. But you can end up walking away with absolutely nothing after 10 years of hard work, just because it didn't quite get to the billion or what have you. Maybe you sell it for half a billion. That sounds like a great success, and you actually end up sharing 50 million at the end of the pot, at the end of the pref stack, with all of the other shareholders at the early stages. So yeah, I would really try and push back on that, on a pref stack when you do a funding round, if you can.
We know a few founders that have been burnt by that and have walked away with zero, which you're right. It just sounds insane that is even possible, that you can get nothing for what you've built. And if you're naive and you just don't think about it, or you just take the money, that could be the position that you're in. Okay, I'm going to bring it back to Dom really quick. Firstly, Hugo, why? I know you said you like to invest in problems that you have yourself, but what about Dom's business or pitch stood out? Why did you make the investment into Talent Torch?
Yeah, so throughout all the different businesses, we have worked with teams in the Philippines. It's like such a hack. I think still so many people don't realize the quality of talent out there, the level of like understanding of the UK and US culture that exists in, like, I've personally never been to the Philippines, but I know it's quite far away, and it's very different to the UK, and yet the teams out there that we've worked with, like, they could literally, they are their English is so perfect, they are super skilled, super dedicated as well. We've had our initial team that we hired for Charged Up, doing our customer support live chat, has been with us for about 7 years now. Never missed a shift. They self-organize between the three people in that team to make sure that they're always online, and they provide a super high quality of service. Like, I just think it's such a hack hiring overseas, and the Philippines seems to be like this perfect little bubble of amazing talent that we've tapped into. And then when Dom came to us saying that he wants to build a recruitment agency for helping founders, offshore to the Philippines, that just resonated so much. I was like, yeah, I'm in. It was a pretty easy conversation, to be honest.
And Dom, from your experience, how did the pitch conversation go, and what happened next? What did the investment allow you to do?
Well, I think, the pitch conversation ended up going quite well. I consider looking for investors in the same way as I would sales. So it's in a series of concentric circles: who's the closest to you already, and then who's the closest to those people, and then you expand outwards. So I managed to get in touch with Rich Hadler as a result of that, who's Hugo's business partner. I think it was quite easy because there's a bit of luck involved, clearly, as with anything, but there's quite good founder idea fit. So my background was headhunting, and so I could just do the job already. If it was just me, I could make money and do this thing. The market is growing, so the outsourcing market is growing dramatically, and software companies like Omnipresent and others have sort of latched onto that. And then, so the timing's quite good because we're going through a recessionary period. So all of these things kind of stacked up, and I was able to just go, first of all, you kind of already want to invest in this, but also here are the other things that we can push you over the line with. The biggest one for me that I sort of pushed the most was the sort of true value. This wasn't a sort of retention play, or we might be able to increase your retention using this software by 10%. It was, we can save you 80% of your costs, and we can do that without reducing the quality. I think the final thing I say on that is that we also hired for Hugo for free and found him somebody epic. So he was like, okay, well, it does work. Also, didn't have to pay anything, and I'm now a customer. So I don't know if that would work for everyone's business, but just offer it for free for the investor. The name of the company, Ashley, by the way, is Talent Torch.
If anyone wants to chat more in depth about if they're sourcing their first few hires, by the way, we've got Deal coming next week, which is like another Omnipresent, who do the employment record stuff, which is like the admin for the hire after you've hired them. So sure they get payroll and stuff. DEEL, yeah. But yeah, if anyone has any questions or wants to chat to you one-to-one, what's the best way for them to do so?
Yes, I think reach out to me by tell you I can put my email address perhaps in the comments or something like that. That would be the best. So I'll do that. I'll do that after I've sort of spoken now. But yeah, happy to speak to people. If it and by the way, there are lots of ways to save costs, as we've said. Outsourcing is definitely one of them. But happy to chat about my experience with boards and making sure you can reduce the costs there. You don't really need an incredibly expensive board member. And there are various other things that you can do as well. Just a quick word on the variety of the type of roles. So I think having run this business for 4 months now, most of the time the feeling I get is jealousy, because I'll hire somebody for a particular business and I'll be like, it would be amazing to have that person in our business for $1,200 a month. So, for example, we're placing a video editor who's worked for My First Million podcast and Naval Ravikant into a business. And when I spoke to her, I was like, maybe I could just hire this person to work for me full time, but not to be.
Out of interest, with board, like if you can, in a couple of minutes, how much do people tend to pay board members, and what's the split between equity and like just paying them like a salary or an amount per month or for coming in for board meetings and stuff?
So huge variety in this. Clearly, as the equity goes up, the cash compensation can come down. I think if you're an early stage startup, then it's a bit of a red flag if a board member is after huge cash compensation, because it shows partly that they don't understand the startup, and partly that they don't understand startups in general, and partly that they perhaps don't think they can add the value to definitely increase the value of the stake that they'd be getting in the business. That'd be one. In terms of exactly how much they're paid, I've done a whole lot of research actually on this in my last business. It keeps changing. I'll probably get this wrong if I sort of go into it now. So what I'll do is I'll also share a sort of board compensation report after this. One thing I would say is that you don't have to just have a board member, as in sometimes the trappings of a business are, right, let's get a non-executive board member who's built a company like this already and who's all singing, all dancing and costs £500,000 a year. Well, I like to think of the best board as a Frankenstein's monster kind of board. And so let's say you need help with marketing or something like that. You don't need somebody who's 60 years old and has marketed for 30 years, 40 years. You can find somebody who's marketed very successfully in a similar business to yours. You know, what do you really need? And you can find that person. You can reach out to them and have a coffee with them every 2 weeks. And you'll probably get more value out of them in that coffee than you would out of somebody who's 10 years out of the game and has been a board member for the rest of the time, than somebody you can speak to just over the phone, WhatsApp, essentially become their friend. And you can do that for each thing. So you can essentially have an advisor for marketing, for sales, for finance, without paying them at all. Clearly, that will grow into a paid relationship. You don't want to sort of take the piss too much. But if you show that you're acting on the stuff that they're saying every 2 weeks, you really value their advice, then you can get massive value from just that without paying for a board member. That's a bit of a hack.
Nice. Quick one from Darren in the chat. What roles can you access and hire for?
Yeah. So a bit of a huge variety of roles. We can do the bulk is virtual assistants, but virtual assistant actually means a bunch of things. So you can get a virtual assistant who focuses on bookkeeping, but can also do other tasks in the business. A VA who focuses on social media management, so is managing your social media, perhaps editing videos, doing graphic design content, and then posting across different channels. That saves a lot of time. I, for example, have just hired a virtual assistant who's going to be helping with the recruitment process. So effectively, you're hiring a recruiter. Just the title is virtual assistant. Beyond virtual assistants, customer success is a big one. SEO specialists, marketing specialists are a really good one. We've placed one who's taken over the SEO of a business and is paid $1,300 a month, I think. We've just placed some video editors, as I mentioned before, and yeah, a variety of other sales reps as well is a big one.
Awesome. On the contractors versus full-time, do you, after you find them, do you work with, like, how do you make sure that they are, I guess, like legally compliant with the laws in their country and the UK?
Yeah, 100%. You've got a couple of options here. I know you're about to speak to Deal, so there are ways of doing it through something like Deal. I wouldn't recommend spending too much on this, because if you're spending $1,000 a month on an individual, you don't want to spend $500 a month on the compliance side. Most of the employees are contractors, so we have the contractor documents ourselves. You don't necessarily need to pay Deal. So when you hire through us, we would find the individuals, we would give you the top 3 to interview, and provide you with the contracts. All you need to do is sign that contract, set up a transfer using something like TransferWise to the individual, and they're classified as a contractor.
Additional costs on top, asks Doug, outside of the salary?
Yeah, no additional costs on top. So we don't charge any additional costs on top. We do charge a success fee of 35% of base salary, and it's a higher percentage because there's a lower base salary, clearly. We don't charge anything else on top of that. In terms of things like tax in the Philippines and healthcare and that sort of thing, that's taken out of what you've paid them. So let's say you pay them $1,000 a month. That is it. There's nothing additional to pay every month. You can be, I always think, don't treat, and people say that they don't do this, but a lot of people do, don't treat the Filipino staff as a second-class citizen. They are part of your team and have huge skills and a lot to offer. So what I'd recommend doing is, if you're giving a bonus to your team, or you give healthcare benefits, perhaps increase their salary or somehow deliver that to them directly. Clearly, you can scale that down because your money has 80% more spending power in the Philippines. But I'd always recommend doing that. If you're setting up ergonomic office chairs for everyone in the office, do the same for the person in the Philippines.
Makes total sense. Thank you so much. I've just put your website on.
It makes a huge difference doing that. We had a team of 4 in the Philippines as part of our customer success team, and they met with the UK team in all the meetings. It felt like they were just one team, and it didn't really matter where they were, because all our team were remote anyway. And we had 2 who ended up being like the top performers in that team. So better than the people we were paying like genuinely like 4 times more to in the UK. The team in the Philippines